In a 2019 article for Tatler magazine, writer Annabelle Sampson discusses the most beautiful buildings in which to festival. We've all heard of Glyndebourne, Garsington, Cliveden and Nebworth, but there are dozens of fabulous country houses that open their gates each year to music lovers across a range of genres. As Sampson writes, most of the time one chooses a festival because of the music or a particular act who's performing that they adore. But there's a new type of festival goer who will choose a festival in part to be granted access to the grounds or the insides of an illustrious privately owned house for the weekend. Many an exclusive country pile is closed off to the public, but not on the weekend of the festival when doors are flung open wide. One such house is the Vache in Buckinghamshire, an immensely private and discreet Elizabethan pile that very much flies under the radar, except for during 1 week each summer when the gardens are filled with people from all walks of life, as Baroque music echoes through the herbaceous borders and walled garden.
Welcome back to the Country House podcast, and today we are delighted to have Jonathan from Vache Baroque Festival, who's going to be talking to us about all things music, all things festivals, and this wonderful particular festival, Vache, which has been set up in the gardens of a country house. And I was just saying to Jonathan before we started, but I'm a huge fan of Baroque music, so I'm particularly excited about this.
Anything Baroque Rory loves.
I know, I'm so predictable. But anyway, it's going to be great. So why don't you crack on with the questions, Geoff?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us. Sadly, Jonathan was going to be joined by his colleague Betty, but he is now holding fort on his own. So, Jonathan, we hope you'll be able to fill in for Betty where you need to. Now, tell us, Jonathan, the Vache Baroque, as I believe it's known, is it's gone through a rebranding, I think, in recent months or years. But it's essentially a festival that's held in this wonderful country house in Buckinghamshire. Can you give us a bit of background before we sort of get into the nitty gritty? Who you are, what your role at Vache Baroque is, and what the festival is, and how it's organised and how it's run.
Sure thing. Firstly, pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting us on. I'm artistic director of Vache Baroque, so it's on me to choose bits of music and drama that I think audiences will like, and to make sure they're presented in a way that's relevant, exciting, entertaining, all those things mixed into one wonderful show. We have been going since 2020. We set up during COVID, and people needed outdoor space primarily. And the space around the Vache house is really, really glorious. Lovely ancient woodland wrapped all around a field that leads on a 10-minute walk to this memorial to Captain James Cook, who stayed here a number of times. The facade of the house is, stunning to look at. And
you're recording from the house itself right now, aren't you?
I am indeed. Yes, we're
magnificent Baroque fireplace behind you from what we saw earlier on that looks very nice.
It's very good. There are a number of really lovely fireplaces in here. There's an incredible Jacobean one. I mean, the house is a bit of a hodgepodge, as I'm sure many old houses are. The facade has lots of those classic bent beams that make it look like it shouldn't really be standing on one side. And I believe that dates possibly to the 1600s, possibly even earlier. And it was an open courtyard. And later, I believe in the 19th century, it was covered up. So there's this wonderful skylight, and now there's this central hall and a balcony that wraps all the way around it with a lovely staircase. That's where we rehearse and do some of our recordings. It's all wooden, so the acoustic's really, really rich and warm. And we've had events inside there, but going back to our original setup, it's so that people can come and explore the grounds, and we can do outdoor performance.
So it was actually because of COVID, rather you hadn't planned to do it pre-COVID, but because of COVID and the need for people to listen to performances outside, that it sort of got you over the line in terms of setting it up.
Precisely. COVID in its weird way was a blessing in disguise for some, and I know incredibly difficult for others. And it was difficult for us as musicians. Obviously, all our work went. So we thought, how can we create some work? And we had access to this space through knowing the owners who love classical music, and that led to us staging Purcell's Dido and Aeneas, and lots of people were free who were fabulous. And I think as a fledgling opera company or classical music organization, to get amazing people to sing for you, they probably read your email and then not reply. But the ecosystem was much more open in 2022, and we had fabulous director, and all the singers and players were absolutely top notch. So we kind of hit the ground running in a strange way, and haven't stopped.
Do you play an instrument yourself, Johnny?
Yes, I play the harpsichord mainly for Vache Baroque and direct from the harpsichord. But Betty and I met singing, and I've been a singer since I was a chorister, age 7 years old. So I mean, I think in between a harpsichord player and a singer is where my musical.
Can you tell us a bit about Betty, because she sadly can't join us today? What's her role with the Vache, and what does she play, or does she just sing?
Betty is a co-founder and executive director, so all the strings are pulled by her, the machine is oiled by her. She's a complete tour de force of a person, and a wonderful soprano as well. She has sung in some of our events, but sometimes the organization is such that she needs to just be giving an overview to the projects, so a mix for her.
We all need a Betty in our lives. I mean, this sounds absolutely fantastic. Maybe we should try and steal Betty for the Country House podcast.
I'm always, I mean, I love the harpsichord. I love Baroque music, full stop. And I love, I mean, it is, I think people often think that you learn the harpsichord the same way as the piano. I know you have to have a much lighter touch, but it's a totally different instrument, isn't it?
Yeah, so the primary a couple of primary differences. One, it's all wood, so it's susceptible to all sorts of weather issues, humidity, the dampeners in the winter don't really work properly, especially performing outside. We've had some very dank days. Luckily, in 5 years, we've only had 45 minutes of a show stopped. So we've had about 20 shows and only 45 minutes.
What does a dank harpsichord sound like?
Slightly out of tune.
And am I right in saying that the main difference between a harpsichord and a piano is that a piano has hammers that hit the keys, whereas a harpsichord plucks the keys? Is that correct?
Exactly.
The strings.
Exactly. So that's the second difference. So
Geoff, that's incredibly impressive knowledge. I had absolutely no idea that was the case about harpsichords.
Well, I was talking, Rory, to a cousin of yours at the weekend who has a house on Mustique, who has a specially air-conditioned room for her piano on Mustique, because she said that the humidity there means that it goes out of tune within about 5 minutes unless you have a special room to keep the piano in. And I imagine it's similar for you in the weather. I imagine, Johnny, that if it's muggy or wet, that it's a completely different sound if it's a really dry summer's day. Is that fair?
It is. You learn to live with it. When I first got my own harpsichord, I actually used to get the iron, and steam irons, you can press that button, it goes and I'd walk around the harpsichords kind of humidifying the room, and then I realized that was a complete waste of my time. So you just have to deal with the humidity shifting around, and that's life with a harpsichord.
With and sorry, just on your singing, out of interest, which part do you tend to sing?
I'm a countertenor.
I wondered whether you might.
I thought, you know what? Yeah, I thought the same thing. I always find it extraordinary, countertenors, because you have such a normal voice when you're speaking, and then as in like a deep blokey voice, and then you sing countertenor. It's extraordinary how you can sing that like that. I mean, I always find it extraordinary,
but it's particularly appropriate to that. I mean, I could be wrong about this, but is it just me, or is there a lot of countertenor parts in Baroque music, especially?
Well, in a way, there are none, but there are two.
Sorry, right.
There are two that modern countertenors emulate. So you have the French haute contre, which is this part, which is essentially a high tenor, which is a very, very delicate, very rare voice. Most tenors, they don't push their sound; they expand their sound upwards in quite a tight, gripping, exciting way. That's why people like listening to opera tenors. It's almost like a controlled scream, But the French voice is much more floaty. Purcell writes for this haute contre voice a lot. So there's composers like Charpentier, these kind of French composers. But then you have the castrati. And fortunately, nobody in the 21st century has to truly emulate a castrati.
Can you explain to our listeners who aren't sure what a countertenor is, what it is?
Yes. So it's a male voice that uses the falsetto register of his voice. So you think of the Bee Gees, Coldplay, Chris Martin does it a lot. It's that it's when you go into a floaty head voice, basically.
I didn't realize I was once doing that for a whole term when I was at school, because I had gone from being an alto to a baritone, but no one had told me. And so I was sort of desperately unable to sing any of the parts and kept sort of doing the very, very high register, which was sort of sounded awful. And eventually I got kicked out of the choir before someone realized what had gone wrong. But so I'm very impressed, basically. But it's a long way to say I'm very impressed.
Well, that's good. True art is made through desperation. So
I think like Rory, I think I might be a baritone as well, but I always struggle because I'm a keen churchgoer, Johnny, and when I'm at church and I'm singing hymns, most people, especially if will be singing either tenor or bass, and I have to always constantly be flipping between the two. Sometimes I need to probably train my baritone voice so that I can sing in between.
No, that's good. Middle of the order batsman, you are. It's fine. There's a place for you.
I really struggle to hit the high notes, but it doesn't feel natural hitting the low notes too much, so it's tricky. But going back to Vache as a whole, so you described a bit to us about why you set it up during lockdown, wonderful outdoor space. Can you describe a little bit more about the wider estates? You've got this wonderful sort of, as you mentioned, a bit of a hodgepodge country house, which is a common theme in our podcast, is these houses that have evolved over centuries and bits added on at different times. We recently did our live podcast recording at Neville Holt Festival, and which, as I'm sure you know, was an opera festival and is now a full-blown arts and culture festival. But again, what's amazing with Neville Holt is you can see all the different periods within one facade because it's so long and thin. You can see the medieval bits and the Victorian bits and the Tudor bits all in one facade. Whereas the Vache, I think more interestingly, the sort of Elizabethan red brick facade with stone dressings is sort of intact at the front, but then there are bits added on all around it and at the back. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair, yeah. Our logo is one of the wonderful sort of triple chimney stacks. I'm not sure what the technical term for, but there are lots of those on the Vache. So when you look at it, that's really what you notice. There are about 10 different stacks of these triple chimneys, all at a lovely angle, which makes it look very, I'm no expert, but you link it to the Hampton Court look, I guess.
Yeah. Lovely Tudor.
Well, I think it's quite similar architecturally, very similar architecturally to Chequers, which is nearby. We did an episode on Chequers a long time ago. For our listeners who haven't listened to it, it's the country residence of the Prime Minister, also in Buckinghamshire, and it's very similar, sort of Elizabethan red brick, stone dressings, leaded windows, but big windows. Very, I suppose, some might say one of the more authentically English vernaculars, because it was before the sort of Renaissance influences came in of, when you later had Baroque and then Palladian. It's sort of the last of, perhaps, I don't know, Rory, what do you think in terms of Elizabethan Tudor architecture is probably more grounded in Englishness than maybe some of the later architectural styles?
Yeah, I think to the sort of, it's the last gasp of English vernacular. I mean, there are often lots of classical elements in it. For example, that they tend to be symmetrical, and there are lots of little classical details around doors and windows and things. But broadly speaking, the frames are Tudor. So it's still kind of very, very late medieval. So you could argue that.
And the house, as we see it largely today, was the work of the Fleetwood family, I believe, whose seat it was for a long time. Johnny, do you know much about the Fleetwoods?
Yeah, so the Fleetwoods first came to own the Vache in something like 1552. I think the sort of patriarch of the Fleetwood family was the sheriff of Buckinghamshire, and they owned the Vache all the way to 1660, when the last Fleetwood to own it had been a signatory of Charles I's beheading. And Charles II comes back and he takes the Vache away from the Fleetwood, chucks them out, and gives it to his son, who was then the Duke of York, later to become James II. And for a Baroque music fanatic like me, this is amazing, because Henry Purcell writes lots of welcome songs and lots of fantastic music for James II. So to know that, I mean, look, it's James II might not have ever visited the Vache. You know, lots of possessions get given to kings and their sons, but it's pretty wonderful and we're actually going to Italy later this year and performing Why Are All the Muses Mute, which was the first welcome song that Purcell ever composed for James II while he probably owned the Vache.
I would, oh God, I mean, that's very exciting. And I was recently listening to the Purcell's funeral march for Queen Mary, which I have to say is just one of the most exquisite. It's so simple but so beautiful. He died young, didn't he, Purcell?
He did. It was something like 36 or 37.
It's a great one of those great ifs for English music if he'd survived.
Absolutely. Well, I think
would you say Purcell is the greatest of the English Baroque composers?
Oh, completely. I think, sort of without a shadow of a doubt, I think you'd be hard pushed to find anyone who'd give a counter argument to that. I mean, he was the only one that really, really understood how to write for string instruments in every part. So you have lots of composers who'd be very good melodists. But I mean, you look at his second violin parts and his, you know, sometimes he writes two viola parts and they're all just doing fantastic things. It's like, it's the difference between just drawing a lovely flower and drawing a flower with all the stems and leaves underneath the flower also being decorative.
2D and 3D.
It's just magnificent music.
Just to the uneducated, I don't know very much about music, but if Purcell is Baroque, then would Handel not be Baroque? What would his musical tradition be called?
Handel's what you'd call high Baroque with a sort of capital H.
Right.
So Handel's composing, he's at the height of his powers in London, sort of 40 years after Purcell, 30, 40 years after Purcell. And he's composing an Italian opera, extremely popular with the Ton in London. And then that kind of fizzles out after a number of years and he moves to oratorio.
Yeah.
But you know, he's Mr. Theatre. Purcell at the end of his career moves to theatre because the court under William and Mary are less enthused by music in church.
I discovered something really funny. Sorry, Geoff, just as a brief aside, then we can crack on. But I was very amused to learn recently that when Handel wrote Ronaldo, I think it was his first opera in London, the printers, when they were putting up all the posters, misprinted the title and managed to call it Binaldo, which really, really made me laugh.
Johnny, I'm interested. We've talked a little bit in the past about English Baroque architecture, which is Rory's specialism, and how it's sort of, I like to think it sort of embodies England's relationship with the continent, in that we sort of take bits but sort of have a slightly different, more toned down approach. So you look at the likes of Castle Howard or Blenheim, they're Baroque clearly, but they're not as flamboyant or ostentatious as the Baroque buildings on the continent. Could you say in some ways Purcell's Baroque, not being high Baroque, was a more slightly sort of toned down version of the more European Baroque that Handel wrote? You know,
is there a parallel there between architecture and music, or does it not really count?
I think if I was going to say anything about Purcell, it's the fact that he draws on both the Italian and French influence. So there are these 24 violons du roi under Louis, and Charles II in exile during the interregnum was, you know, fascinated by this string group, these violins, which, you know, were the new thing. And the Italians, you know, you think of Stradivarius, you know, they'd really made the violin popular. So Purcell comes back, and then Charles II says, I want the music that I've been hearing in France. Right. So Purcell thinks, right. And he writes a last sort of goodbye set of music to the viols, which is this old family of strings. And then he just in earnest starts writing for violin. So you can say that his violin music is French in essence. Mm-hmm. But then the way he writes for voices, very, very theatrical, very operatic. He completely understands this Italian style of writing for voices. Mm-hmm. This idea of recitative, just laying a chord and then just singing the poetry over it in a really, really captivating, dramatic way. So, for him, Europe was clearly hugely important to his musical sensibilities. But then to think of a more toned down English style, I think theatrically, his work, he writes these semi-operas. I don't think the English were really into everything being sung. So you have his Fairy Queen, Midsummer Night's Dream, or big extracts from it would be acted, and then his music would be inserted. And there's quite a lot of dance music. So that I think is particularly English.
That was sort of building out of the masque tradition, wasn't it? I mean,
precisely.
Because the English were sort of a bit iffy about opera to begin with, and they were familiar with masques and sort of musical interludes and plays, and so it took a bit longer for opera to arrive in England, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting.
Let's get back to Vache.
In terms of timing, it all ties in nicely because I think Purcell was born in the mid 17th century, wasn't he?
1659.
1659, yeah, exactly. And the Vache had recently been purchased then by the Fleetwoods, and it was Thomas Fleetwood's son George.
The Fleetwood family purchased Vache about a century before.
Yeah, but interestingly, I was looking at, that's right, and then George Fleetwood, was born 1564, died 1620. So it's sort of, I see. So Purcell came slightly later, and George, I love this. You mentioned George was involved with the killing of the king, Charles I. A little bit of context for our listeners. So there were 59 commissioners known as the regicides of Charles I, who were the 59 men who signed the execution warrant. And they were all, as you mentioned, Johnny, heavily punished when the Restoration happened, and some of them fled, some of them were exiled, and some of them were killed. And I think in the case of Fleetwood, he was imprisoned in the Tower of London, but then it's a little bit vague what happened to him, but people believe he was sort of deported to Tangier in Morocco, where he lived the remainder of his days, which is quite interesting. I just think as a sort of,
that sounds quite nice. Maybe I think if we'd been in a civil war, Geoff, you would definitely have been a regicide. There's no doubt about it.
100%. Well, I like to think I would have done what the Fiennes family did at Broughton Castle. I think they were very clever, and they hosted the signing of the warrant, but rather importantly didn't actually sign it themselves. And so if I were clever enough, I would have probably encouraged others to sign it but not signed it myself. Who knows?
Yes.
Johnny, for context, Rory and I have ongoing sort of discussions. I'm very much on the Puritan end of the spectrum, and Rory's a papist, so I would definitely have been a Roundhead and Rory a Cavalier. So we joke a lot about that.
I would have had a very large hat with a huge feather.
Brilliant.
Which probably would have got in the way as I've been fighting.
Well, on that note, this might be interesting. So John Milton's cottage is very nearby.
Oh, really?
Where he sort of he wrote Paradise Regained, and we did a show where we edited down Paradise Lost and Regained, and then inserted movements of bar cantatas, and Simon Callow came, and a couple of other actors. And this is an example of our multi-art form approach to Baroque music. So Milton's cottage, and Milton was obviously, he worked for Cromwell, and that used to be the estate manager's cottage of the whole Vache estate. When the Vache estate, so people can visit Milton's cottage and then come to the festival hopefully and see the Vache, and you just have to imagine that all the land connecting it at that time was pasture land, and Chalfont St Giles was in between the two.
That's interesting. I mean, Milton, he also wrote a masque, didn't he? Comus, I think it was,
Yes.
Which, I mean, I read once and it's absolutely exquisite. And I presume that must have also had sort of musical interludes in it as well.
I believe Comus was set to music by Matthew Locke, but please don't quote me on that.
Well, I have no idea who it was, but so that's quite appropriate as well. I mean, that's also another sort of link with what you're doing. But it sounds amazing. I mean, I like how you have this more integrated approach, and how it sounds like you're being more experimental than other opera festivals with the way you approach.
Well, we hope so. And if I could just talk for a moment about what goes on in the grounds of the Vache when we have an opera.
Sure.
I mean, we called ourselves a festival when we started, and in the summer we still do hold a festival, of which the opera is the centerpiece. So I guess a festival is a celebration. You need more than one thing really to be a festival. So we pick apart our shows and magnify and expand, delve into themes, history, characters from the stories, and we fill our ground with installations, sound pieces, activities, recorded interviews. So we, for example, last year we had l'Olympiade, the Olympiad by Pergolesi. And so we had 14 different Olympic sports to try out when you arrived. So badminton, we had an Olympic level archery coach doing archery. We had a groundsman come and paint an 8-lane running track for egg and spoon races. We had bowls, we had skateboarding, we had BMX. So, I guess the idea is that you walk in and there's a lot to do before the opera starts, other than picnicking. But obviously everyone loves a picnic, so you need to do that when you're tired out. And I mean, the grounds really lend itself to exploration. There's a lake / pond. I don't know quite what the word for it is, but it's very beautiful and has a little island in the middle that you get to over a little red bridge. There's ancient woodland that wraps around the whole house and grounds. There's this memorial to Captain James Cook that you can walk up to if it's a dry enough day, or bring your wellies, and you can climb up a staircase and sort of view the whole panoramic from that.
What was the link? What was the link to Captain Cook?
So a guy called Palliser, who was kind of top brass in the Navy, was very good friends with Captain James Cook. And when Cook was home from his explorations and travels, he would stay at the Vache. They were, very close friends. And when Cook died,
the Pallisers sort of became the owners of the Vache after the estate had been confiscated by the king, and then the Pallisers bought it, I assume. And
yeah, exactly. Must have come into ownership, many decades after.
Now, I find it interesting, this part of Buckinghamshire, and for our listeners, maybe who are in America who aren't aware of where it is. So Buckinghamshire is one of the home counties. It's one of the counties that borders Greater London. But what's interesting is it's got very good transport connections, I think. It's sort of, I suppose it's sort of north of London, slightly northwest, I suppose, of London. And what's lovely is it's got this plethora of wonderful country houses because of its proximity to London. It was people could build houses. People who made money in the city, like the Fleetwoods, could build country houses which they could actually go to just for weekends. So we talk about a lot of grand houses that are all over the country, but the particular ones up north, Yorkshire or Lancashire or Cumbria, the country house owners would be in London for half the year basically, and then go to their country estates for the other half of the year. Whereas the beauty of the home counties houses in Buckinghamshire is they were able to sort of treat them as weekend homes more. And what I find interesting is right where, so the Vache is in Chalfont St Giles, I think, but there's so many. So I mentioned Chequers is nearby, but I always find it interesting because I think you're very near. I don't know if you pronounce it Cheney's or Cheney's.
I think Cheney's.
Cheney's, which is a really interesting little village because it was the original seat of the Dukes of Bedford. So the Russell family who live at Woburn Abbey, one of the great stately homes of England, their family mausoleum is still in the parish church at Cheney's, and there's a plethora of wonderful country houses around there, and also some I think have been turned into hotels. But what I think is very clever in terms of you choosing the Vache as your location is the accessibility, because it's incredibly accessible to London, isn't it? I think it's even near a tube line, isn't it?
It is. You can get to it on the Metropolitan line, Chalfont and Latimer, but then also to Gerrard's Cross from Marylebone, which is just a 20-minute train. And we, as part of our drive for accessibility, we put on free shuttle buses, which race the 10 minutes. Well, they don't race, they drive at exactly the speed they should between the Vache and Chalfont and Latimer. So you can arrive whenever you want, within 4 hours of the show, and then there are 3 or 4 after each show. So it's just a tap of your card from central London, and that's it.
And there are so many other things, like you mentioned, Milton's Cottage, I think, is now a museum in the village of Chalfont St Giles, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So I suppose if people wanted to, and I'm not going to push this, but people wanted, there's so many things you could do during the day, before going to the are your performances in the evenings, or are they sort of late afternoon, early evening, or?
So this year, our circus opera, which will be under a huge circus tent in the grounds, kicks off at 5:30. Then there's a long interval, and it will be done by about 8:45, 9.
Okay, very
Great.
civilized.
And what, Johnny, can you help just capture the atmosphere? Because I started with this quote, sort of abridged quote from Tatler about so many people love to, music. It's so much more than just listening to the music, isn't it? It's the setting, and listening to the opera in the Royal Opera House is so much lovelier than listening to it in a regular theatre, for example. In the same way, listening to beautiful music in the grounds of a country house has become hugely popular, in lots of different genres. Can you capture what it looks like if you arrive at the Vache? And so firstly, I want to just say the Vache is still a privately owned country house, is it not? And it is, and it's not open to the public. It's not a house that you can sort of just turn up and walk around in. But the owners very kindly open it for the festival every year for a week, is it?
That's right. Over the course of 2 weekends.
2 weekends. Okay. And so I imagine you do get some people who come, like that opening quote I read, people who do come simply partly to snoop around and see beautiful buildings. But can you capture what it's like for a punter? You come out of London on the train, you get the shuttle bus, you arrive at this gate lodge, go through the gates. What greets you in terms of the atmosphere and the layout and the format of the evening?
It's expansive. The lawns really, really stretch. And when the lawn's finished, there's this huge field that goes all the way to Captain Cook's Memorial. So you really feel like if you wanted to, you could walk for 15 minutes unbroken. So you don't feel fenced in. There's no real zone that you have to be in to picnic. You can really go off with whoever you're with and set up, camping chairs or a rug and be a long way away from anyone else. Really have some privacy, actually.
And you can bring a picnic, or there's also catered areas as well. Is that right?
There's catered areas. Yeah, you can buy food from us, and there's a well-stocked bar. But we're not going to stop anyone bringing their own food and drinks. The sun obviously comes down in this long interview, and the lake picks the light, and there's bird song everywhere. Cause one thing, it really is a arboretum. There's a few huge trees. I mean, there's one red-leafed poplar that must be something like 250 years old. It's a real kind of. And there's this grandfather and grandmother. The grandmother tree is this massive pine that looks like a ginormous Christmas tree. And I mean, to sit under one of those trees and then just to look at the sun setting, and when it gets to kind of 8 p.m. is really, really glorious. I'd say it's just got so many different areas as a house and grounds that you can explore. I think it's one of those sorts of places.
So thank you for that description, Jonathan. So Geoff and I have arrived. We've propped up the bar for a bit. We've had a good eat. We've maybe explored, got lost in Milton's cottage, stretched our legs after the tube, etc., in the fields. But what could we expect from the show this year specifically?
So we're staging a circus opera under a huge circus tent with an aerial frame, 2 circus performers, 9 singers and 10 instrumentalists in the band. Mm-hmm. And the opera is called The Venetian Carnival, by a French composer called André Campra, who is composing slap bang in the middle of the French Baroque era, and is 1699. Before Campra, a composer called Jean-Baptiste Lully had a bit of a monopoly, and all of his operas were kind of mythical themes and quite serious and highbrow. And Campra, he just writes about humans. So slightly frivolous love affairs and a carnival atmosphere. So everything's a bit topsy-turvy. People play different characters. You're never really sure who you're watching. You're never really sure who's going to be singing halfway up a silk on an aerial frame, or an instrumentalist that leaves the band and starts walking around. We have percussion. It's going to be a really, really lively show, and I think fairly unexpected for people that might have had a taste of opera. You mentioned Ronaldo earlier on. It's going to be very different to something like that.
And in terms of format, is it sort of a little bit like if you go to Glyndebourne or Garsington, in terms of you can arrive early, set up your picnic, and then you all go in for the first half, and then during the interval, it's an extended interval, and you go off and have some more drinks and some more to eat, and then you come back? Is that how it works? Or
Exactly that. So our extended interval will be something like an hour and a quarter.
Okay.
And they're two halves of about 50 minutes to an hour, something like that.
Great.
And I suppose, I mean, I don't know, Jonathan, what your history was personally before you came to the Vache, but how do you find the process of creating music performance specifically in a country house setting as opposed to, say, a theatre or a recording studio or something like that? Is it much different, or do you think it adds something?
I think it really does. Yeah, I think being around nature, quite simply, would have been, a huge draw for the people building these houses to get out of the city. And I think it's the same today. Musicians spend a lot of time on tubes, lugging instruments around, and then being quite hot in small rehearsal venues or churches, which can be beautiful. But to make the trip out of the city, to rehearse, make music together, socialize in the breaks, go and sit on the lawn when it's sunny, kick a football around, these sorts of things. It means that when you knuckle down to work, you're doing it in a way that's really free of your normal daily cares. And I think that leads to, wonderful music making and friendship building, actually, which is really important.
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that. So you've got the sort of sense of freedom from the artist, but also there's that kind of double escapism from the audience, because they're not only escaping London, but they're also escaping into a performance. I've always noticed when I've been to operas and sort of musical events in country house gardens that the country house and the landscape and the garden, almost it becomes an extension of the show around you. It becomes this whole sort of world that you get lost in. It's a really magical experience.
It really is. I saw recently Midsummer Night's Dream at Garsington, and they had the back of their space open, and the birds were singing. It's similar at the Vache. This is the thing: performers are on stage, and you're rehearsed during the day, but it gets to the evening, and it's a particular type of weather, it's a particular type of stillness in the air. Nature makes the theatre for the audience and the performers alike, so everyone's there experiencing something completely fresh for the first time, and it's it creates a magical bond between everyone in the space, actually.
I wonder if also the historic nature of the country houses add a sense of sort of grounding or gravitas to it as well, because when you think about the Vache, it was built in the late 16th, early 17th century, and slightly later we had the arrival of Baroque music. Purcell, as we mentioned, came a century after the Fleetwoods bought the estate. And so what's lovely to think, I suppose, as well, is that building was standing right there as it is now at the time when Purcell, for example, was writing that music, and there could have been people in Buckinghamshire listening to the harpsichord playing one of the first renditions of a Baroque piece in the hall or whatever at the Vache 400 years ago. And it's that lovely sense of the lasting nature of country houses, that how they've stood the test of time, means that it roots us a bit, I think, in our history and places it in context. I was speaking to a friend last night who is an art curator who organizes every year an art exhibition at a chateau in the Loire. And again, she said it's really interesting how there's almost a move at the moment away from sort of the big art fairs at, Masterpiece or Frieze or Art Basel, towards more curated art shows in historic buildings. And I think it's the same with music. I wonder, it gives a sense of placing the music within history, within its context. Do you think that's fair?
Really fair and well said. So there's this famous lutenist songwriter called John Dowland, Elizabethan. He's kind of misery guts, oh woe is me kind of lute songs, and he wrote a small piece for Miss Bridget Fleetwood, who is one of the daughters of the Fleetwood that owned one of these houses in, I think, the early 1600s, late 1500s. So that would have been performed here. We staged Handel's Acis and Galatea. I mean, that was written for an outdoor performance. And at the end of it, a fountain came on, because Galatea was a water nymph, and we have a little fountain just away from the stage, and we actually sort of turned that on during the event to try and emulate that first performance. You think of things like Handel's water music. You know, a lot of Baroque music was composed for the outdoors. So that's the outdoor space. We've brought audiences inside as well. We've worked with deaf-blind children in Buckinghamshire, and because John Milton was blind when he wrote Paradise Regained, and we were celebrating that with a project where we blindfolded the audience for the majority of it, and had these dancer guys walking around with scents and doing small movements with the audience, and getting them up off their seats and doing little bits of dance. And this was all blindfolded, and that was in the Vache Hall, but nobody knew what the Vache Hall looked like, because we led them all in blindfolded. And then for the last 5 minutes, we took their blindfolds off, and we had a lot of tears, a lot of people that really couldn't piece together what the space was they were in. So these wonderful halls in country houses that have balconies and things like that, they can really be used for amazing effect when you place musicians around them. But we thought we'd be cheeky and do it without letting the audience know that that's what was happening.
Well, that's kind of what all halls are ultimately riffing off great halls to some way, shape, and form. And great halls often had minstrels' galleries where music were played. I mean, they were the original concert venues. So that's sort of, to my mind, at least from a cultural perspective, what they're for, other than having big piss ups. Another thing, I maybe we should have covered it earlier, but is there a specific reason that you focus on Baroque music? I mean, is it a particularly rich seam of music, or is it because the owners particularly like that? I mean, what's the story behind that?
A few things. One, you can do Baroque music really well with not that many musicians. Right. So, as a small company just starting out, to think of doing a romantic opera, big Tchaikovsky opera, like how are you going to do that financially?
You've got to get the Sugar Plum Fairies in and all that kind of
yeah. So, I mean, that's the business side of it, but that's obviously not the main thing. Baroque music is so full of contrasts, just like art of the time. There's something for everyone. There's rage arias, there's love arias, there's show-stoppingly beautiful slow arias. The instruments are interesting. You have these huge lutes with necks like the giraffes of the instrument world called theorbos. You have, famous pieces by Bach for the cello. Everybody knows the cello suites. Everybody knows Vivaldi's Four Seasons. So there's an in there. People have heard some of this music, and I think the darkness, the light, the fast, the slow, it's just so brilliant for so many different types of people, and we want to really be accessible and show off live music and classical music, and it's a wonderful gateway to the world of all classical music, we think.
I was sorry, go Rory. There you go on.
No, I was just going to say, on that subject of darkness and light, I mean, it's just a brief point, but I've recently got very into Lully, and I've been listening to a lot of his overtures and things like that. And there's such, I was playing them to a friend, and there's such, and they were really surprised by how there's so much power in them, so much gravitas, and also at times this immense darkness, and other times this kind of immense sort of philosophical light touch. I mean, we think of Baroque music as being the sort of stuff that, I don't know, you hear in period dramas, but it's such a rich tradition. And also, funnily enough, I mean, people, obviously, a lot of people like a good beat to a piece of music, and they associate that with modern clubbing and things like that. But Baroque music is sort of the original beat music, as far as I'm concerned. It has these incredible rhythms behind it.
Totally. I mean, most of it is, rooted in dance music. So, for all the highbrow, huge theatrical performances by Lully with like million dancers and mechanisms on stage, bringing people down from roofs and stuff, essentially it's got a lot of peasant dance music in it as well. So when people are in these theatres paying, the cheap tickets to the people in the royal box, there was something for everyone there.
Yeah.
I think if you think of church music, Bach on these amazing huge organs, you can go around Europe and just go to these fantastic Dutch churches. That's so Baroque as an instrument. Everybody's heard that famous, the D minor Bach toccata. In every single space, from chamber to theatre to church, my personal opinion is, it's probably never been done better than in the Baroque period.
Now, it's interesting. You've mentioned a lot about accessibility, and not just in terms of getting there, but in terms of reaching a new and younger audience. And I know on your your mission is to connect a younger and more diverse range of people to Baroque. Firstly, how do you do that in terms of how do you reach people who otherwise haven't been exposed to Baroque music? And secondly, why do you think Baroque music is so accessible to, and why would it captivate people who perhaps aren't interested in classical music, who haven't ever really engaged in classical music? I suppose, how do you go about doing that?
Sure. So we have a stepping stone approach, right down from babies to, your more classical audience member, maybe in their 50s, 60s, 70s, who've probably seen a lot of Baroque opera and music before. So we have relaxed performances, which are much shorter and compared by someone on stage, so the story is explained. And we have a children's choir that's attached to that, and they get up and sing one of the choruses. We have mask making in the grounds that babies and toddlers and children can get involved with, so they really feel like there's a whole process around the show. We then go into primary schools, year 5 and 6, generally state schools in Buckinghamshire and the surrounding counties, and we tell the history of sound for 4.5 billion years with 4 of us, with instruments and voices and a box full of props. We
what Betty's doing today, because Betty said she was at a school today. Would she be promoting classical music?
So she's actually at a special school in Buckinghamshire, Heritage House, and this comes off the back of last year's project working with deaf-blind children. So we've been doing more and more work in special schools, and we have a really good relationship with 2 schools now, and we do one-on-one sessions and whole school sessions. We have a young ambassador scheme where teenaged young people come in, and we give them an event to design, and we give them a budget, and then we do production meetings with them, and they can choose the music and how it's decorated and the food at the interval and all these sorts of things. So we're trying to build young producers as well who get an appetite for putting on things, not just performing things. I think people think of getting kids into music, it's about them hearing it and then picking up an instrument, but actually the event side of it is really important as well. If we can get people with a taste of putting things on, then that's really where future audiences are going to be made.
What is these? Often, I suppose it's often children you're working with. What is it like for them when they first come to? I mean, I imagine some of them as well have never been to a grand privately owned country house like the Vache as well, and so they come to this extraordinary house with an extraordinary garden and listen to extraordinary music, none of which they've ever been exposed to before. What is that experience like for them?
We like to think absolutely wonderful. So we had 60 primary school kids for a midsummer event, and we had 3 sessions with them beforehand, making huge lanterns, and then we did this mask of the seasons from Purcell's Fairy Queen, and they did this lantern procession all around the grounds, stopping at the lake to pick up all the little frogs that had just ceased to be tadpoles, and they were leaping around. So there's a lot of nature involved, and we had 2 actors leaping out from behind trees doing extracts from Midsummer Night's Dream, and then instrumentalists playing moments from Purcell's Mask. So we really wanted to break up this idea that you have to come and sit and watch a performance for 45 minutes and concentrate. So they were just walking around, always on the move, full of energy, with their lanterns, face painting. They all had a team, they all had a season each, so they felt like they were slightly competing. So it's about making the experience of classical music and actually the experience of being in what can be quite an austere place, I think. Giving it movement, giving it energy, so you don't feel like a country house is somewhere you have to walk into and be quiet and read a guidebook and don't make any noise, and that's how you experience it.
And this that sounds absolutely magical. And would
Really
that
really
be
does.
philanthropic, put on for free for the children, and then and out of interest, sort of nitty gritty, is that supported by people buying tickets to the festival and donors and grants and stuff like that? Is that how you sort of support that charitable work?
It is. So these were state school children from Buckinghamshire who didn't pay a penny. And we had gone to their schools and done these sessions, and we raised funds through trusts and foundations and private sponsorship, so that we can always offer our workshops and shows to these children and schools completely free of charge. And we believe strongly that needs to happen, because especially in the state sector, you have teachers who are extremely overworked and stressed out, and to say that they need to help with the show or raising money, I think they'd run a mile just to say it's all on a plate. They love it and the kids love it. For our tickets, I mean, look, generally you can't make money from tickets when you put on shows, especially in the classical live music realm. You always have to have support, but that's fine. With that support you build up communities, and that in itself is part of the joy of putting on events, and those communities bring people, and that's how you expand.
Out of interest, on a kind of from an international perspective, is England a leader? Is Britain a leader in sort of country house music events? I mean, are there other for example, do they do lots of, I don't know, chateau performances or sort of villa performances in Italy? Because I haven't heard very much about that kind of thing. Is it a uniquely English thing?
I think they do. Definitely in France, there's that sort of stuff going on. Les Arts Florissants do that in Tiré, which is William Christie's place. I know Versailles does a lot to bring the public in. Yeah. I think when you go further south, it just gets very hot in the summer. Yeah. And I don't say that facetiously. You have to start very late in Italy, and I think that does change things.
So we benefit from the balmy English climate.
I really think we do. I think it's just such a gorgeous time of day, arriving at 5:30, 6, and then a performance, and you're having your picnic when you get that kind of crepuscular light, and it's just
it's the time you want to take all your selfies because of the golden hour.
Exactly. No, I think for a number of reasons, I think the English do it best, and that's why we have a lot of these events and festivals going on that have been successful for many decades now.
Yeah. That sort of ties in, before we sort of finish up, Jonathan. We think about exactly. We've done it so well for so long. Glyndebourne sort of pioneered the country house opera sort of model, and likewise, you think about the great rock concerts at Nebworth, or the sort of contemporary music at Wilderness at Cornbury Park,
or Houghton, or
exactly, and so many things. Why do you think festivals in the UK have become, whether it's classical, opera, contemporary, or whatever, why have they become so associated with the country house sort of circuit? I mean, so much now in the summer, it's part of the summer season now, isn't it? The social summer season. You have I know it's listed now in Debrett's and stuff, that you have starting with the boat race through Chelsea Flower Show, Wimbledon Ascot, and Garsington, Glyndebourne, the Grange, the Vache, I suppose, and all these other festivals. Why has it become so much? What is it about the synonymity, I suppose, of country houses and music festivals?
Escape from the city is probably an obvious one. Actually making the trip to go and see something, the excitement on the train down there, or the car down there, there's a build up to it. I think the curated space, these places are designed so that one can have maximum enjoyment of the vistas and the views. You're not boxed in. There's always something. It enriches the soul being able to look down a hill or look down to a lake.
We were talking about this last week, weren't we, Geoff? Sorry to interrupt, but we were talking. Our episode was on the English landscape, and how it's, you know, a highly curated natural landscape designed to look not natural, but actually, you know, very much enhanced for the senses. And I suppose so. A lot of the parks around the houses we're talking about have that feature, which means that you feel that you're in nature, but actually you're in a perfect version of nature.
Yeah, well said. I think the curation is important, isn't it? It's feeling safe within a space, but it's exotic, it's different, but actually I think you two might actually have better opinions on
No,
the country house.
We talked about this in the Capability Brand episode we did last week, in terms of what is it that is so sort of transfixing about a curated natural landscape. And it's, I suppose, a bit like anything that's created that's beautiful and natural simultaneously. It's sort of I mean, we talked a bit about sort of the philosophy behind it, and how it almost makes us, you know, in a world that is beautiful and broken, it gives us a little glimpse of I suppose a perfect world in when you're sitting in a landscape that is been perfectly curated. But just in terms of just sort of closing this wonderful discussion, which has been fascinating and really, really enjoyable. The centerpiece of your sort of offering and the sort of focal point of your summer is the festival at the end of August and beginning of September. I think it's the last weekend of August and the first weekend of September. That's the carnival that you mentioned. If people wanted to come to that, I assume tickets are still available. Where can they book tickets, and how else can people support the Vache Baroque?
Tickets are certainly available. So if you go to vachebaroque.com, there's a What's On tab, and you'll see the two things. You'll see the main shows, and then also a relaxed performance. If you have small children, or for whatever reason you'd like a shorter show or a more relaxed vibe, then you can come to that on the last Sunday morning. We also have a jazz event on the middle Friday, if you're into jazz, which will also be under this circus tent, and we'll put some dreamy, cool lighting, and the bar will be inside the tent as well for that. And then becoming a VB friend, we call them, is always a good way to get involved. And we do exclusive events and concerts in London and the Vache and elsewhere for our VB friends. And there are other perks when you're actually in the grounds, free drinks and things like this. I mean, a main way to support us is to come to one of our shows. We always think this.
You have an under 35s membership as well, don't you? To encourage them to be involved.
Exactly. VB under 35s. We recently did a pub event in Camden, which was very fun. We coupled it with bingo, which is strangely complex, and it took us about 4 rounds to know what was going on. So,
and it's interesting, just going back to the location in Buckinghamshire. You know, Buckinghamshire is simultaneously, like so many home counties, a very wealthy and beautiful county, and also a very poor county. So you think about towns like Slough, amongst others, which are architecturally not particularly pretty and not particularly affluent, and then you have some very affluent villages surrounding it. And so I suppose, again, what's lovely with what you offer is, because music is for everyone, in the same way you offer a wonderful place where people from all walks of life can come together, rich and poor, you know, grand and less grand, and all sorts of people all sort of together enjoying music. And it's a wonderful unifying thing. I always think there are a few things that really bridge all sort of class, ethnic, cultural boundaries, and music obviously is one of them. And it's lovely that you have chosen a site that is so accessible for people from so many different walks of life.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. We want it to be an open, free invitation for everyone in Buckinghamshire, and, you know, the whole of the UK, the whole of the world, just to come and experience this lovely place and not feel like they need to know about the composer or the story or have, you know, insider knowledge, and they can just walk into the grounds and just be you know, lightly bathed in the art and the woodlands and the experience.
I can't wait. I'm so excited.
Well, to our lovely listeners, Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on. This has been absolutely riveting and really enjoyable. Rory and I believe, Rory, we've been offered to come as guests to the Vache Baroque either at the end of August or the beginning of September. That last weekend of August or the first weekend of September. Even if we go on separate weekends, to our lovely listeners, if you want to come and meet Rory and myself as well as Jonathan and enjoy the music with us, please do sign up, and we will put a link to the tickets on our bio on our Instagram page. So please do click on that and come along. We'd love to see you. And on that note, Jonathan, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. And to our lovely listeners, thank you again for your time and your support. And we look forward to you joining us again soon. Bye-bye.
Geoff, Rory, thanks very much.
Bye-bye.